Christian parenting.
Hey everyone, Dante here with my partner Dave, and we want to welcome you back to Legacy Dads, where you get your weekly dose of biblical manhood. This podcast is for men, husbands, and fathers in all stages of life, where we promote and advocate proven biblical principles for leaving a lasting legacy. Now that we have that business out of the way, Dave, what's been going on with you, my friend?
Dante, it's good to talk to you again. I'm really excited for this episode to come out. In terms of my life, I'm still working on the transition and moving down to South Florida. Over Memorial Day weekend, it was rainy and cold here, so there was not a lot of outdoor activities. So that was pretty recent. I also had my promotion ceremony, which was a lot of fun. I had my best friend from high school, who I've known for 30 plus years, who I've also served with for 21 plus years. And he was the presiding officer over that ceremony. So it was just a really neat kind of experience for me. So we had the family up, we had some friends from church, we had some friends around, and it's just been a good time. So that's kind of what's been going on with me. How about you?
We had a 8th grade graduation yesterday. The weather, it was outdoors, so thankfully no rain, and we had all that going on, grandparents and hustle bustle. Today, my wife was all day at a Great America, with her 8th grader and a bunch of other 8th graders and a few other parents. And tomorrow we're going to have something like 70 8th graders over at our house for a pool party / graduation party. It was one of those things where you just sent out the invite to the class thinking that, maybe like 40 or 50 will say no. And as my wife will tell you, one after another kept going, yes, yes, yes. So we're going to have to deal with 70 people running through our house and outdoors tomorrow. And hopefully by Friday, my wife will still want to be married to me. So we'll see.
So what I'm hearing is Dante has a castle. Got it.
Yeah. No, we, years ago, we did a weekend going from good to great. And we had one of our care pastors that him and his wife led it. They were parents of 3 boys. And one of the things that really resonated with my wife and I was, with the sign of the times that we're in, where the brokenness is out there, just parents not home, single parents, and people trying to work both jobs. You never know where you're putting your children to. So why not make your house the most inviting? And they said, we saved a couple trips that were vacation. We put money down and we eventually put a pool in the house. We finished our basement. And they said some of the conversations that we had with our boys' friends just was spiritual, just was great. And above all, we were just friends, and it just allowed them to, ultimately come to church and, through a relationship, come to know the Lord. So we were all on board. We're like, we're going to do that. We're going to make the cuts, do everything else that we have to do. And honestly, we've done that, and we really have seen the fruit of it. So cool. on to this, Dave. So yes, I got to ask you, I've been a men's ministry leader, as I think we've talked about on this podcast, since 2007. I try to leave, but they won't let me leave. So, they keep, having me do more and more things. No, I'm kidding. I love these guys, a bunch of rugged guys, men of faith. But I've also been an elder for over 9 years. And I have a question to ask you related to this podcast today.
All right. I like questions. Shoot.
All right. In my experience, and what we've talked about, what you've heard on podcast before, what do you think one of the most serious hidden pandemics that men have in our church? And for that matter, let's just say men in general in the church and in the world have.
Well, you talk about pandemics, and I think that's kind of a sensitive subject, but I don't think we're going to go there right now. But I do think one of the most serious pandemics that men have to deal with is probably pride of life and lust of the eyes.
Yep. 1 John 2:15-17. You nailed it right there. And, idolatry, anything that, goes before the Lord, and with that, pornography. And it is such a sensitive topic. And, some of our listeners, I know right now, either you're just going to tune it out or turn it off. But, before you do that, give us 30 minutes, give us 40 minutes, and open your ears, open your heart, and just ask, God, maybe is this a time that you really want me to take the stewardship seriously in my life? Is this a time that you, because you're a holy God, really want me to take purity serious in my life. So what do you have to lose? Because if you're still in your same routine, it's not going to matter. But if you really want to honor God, let's go for it. Let's take a listen to what this podcast has for you today.
Yeah, I totally agree. When we were asked to do this interview, the I guess the leading line on one of the things that we got was, any kid can get addicted to porn, even church kids. And that really raised my eyebrows a little bit. And I said, well, yeah, that's probably true. When you look at all of the statistics and everything in terms of, people who are getting exposed to pornography, I think the ages are getting younger and younger. And so we've got a couple authors of a new book. So we've got Josh Glaser and Dan Weiss. They are authors of the book Treading Boldly Through a Pornographic World, a Field Guide for Parents. And it provides parents with the tools they need to navigate a hyper-sexualized culture. As leaders of Christ-centered ministries aimed at helping families live in God's beautiful design for sexuality, Josh and Daniel are passionate about helping parents raise healthy kids, both relationally and emotionally. In their book, Josh and Daniel are the experts parents need to help their kids navigate a digital world full of landmines. And with that, Dan, Josh, welcome to Legacy Dads podcast.
Thanks for having us. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dante. We're really glad to be here.
So for our listeners, tell us, this project, like how did you guys come together? How did you guys come together to write this? And why is this such an important topic in your lives?
So my ministry, Regeneration, we've been doing parenting conferences for several years. And I thought we got to put this into a little booklet, something small, get this in parents' hands. But I I kept putting the project off. So I was reaching out to some friends and said, anybody who could do some writing for us? And a mutual friend put me in touch with Daniel, called him up, pitched the idea to him. And over the course of a couple conversations, we really, really resonated with each other, kind of vision for this. But eventually he said, this isn't a booklet. This is a book, man. And I want to write it with you. And so if I can insert myself into this, let's do it. And it has been a truly challenging but wonderful collaboration that I think God's really brought, two guys who have a similar heart for this topic, but who have very different gifts and perspectives. And so I think it's become a great resource.
Yeah, and honestly, it's hard writing a book. It's definitely hard writing a book with a co-author. And as Josh would tell you, it's really hard writing a book with me as the co-author. So kudos to him. He's done a great job with this.
And the reason we're passionate, you asked us why we're passionate about it. Like we have seen so many parents, an increasing number of parents who feel really intimidated, overwhelmed, insecure about raising kids in a pornography-saturated culture that is also immensely connected digitally. And really, we are still in the first generation of parents where kids are walking around with devices, innumerable devices that can access porn. And so we just thought we got to get after it. We have to help parents get in this with their kids. It's too important.
I think it's a lot of parents I feel are overwhelmed or I would even say under educated as far as the prowess of kids today. Either via video streaming, whether or not moms and dads, you have a Disney channel, you have Netflix, you have Amazon, you have cable channels, whatever. You are kidding yourself if you think that your kids have not been exposed either via texting, either via sexting, either via inappropriate images. I was walking with a high school student, asked me to, he knew me through when I was teaching kids ministry, and he asked me if I would mentor him through high school. And it turned out to what I thought would be a year that I saw him through the following 3 years. And then it turned out into college. And then in college, he graduated. And it's one of these guys that I was just so proud of, just for his walk, being honest with his struggles. He was telling me, like, even in his high school, as a Christian young man, he really took purity seriously and married now. Very proud of him. His name's Josh. And if I know he listens to this, and Josh, I want to tell you, you're God's man. And you bless my life in so many ways. But he was telling me, sexting in high school is a really big deal. And the images that, you can all of a sudden, you just exchange phone numbers, it hits you, you're caught. And the reality of it is, I think the parents, we have this ostrich approach that, we expect our kids to know the boundaries, know the rules, and then we just kind of put our head in the sand and just pray that they're not going to like be exposed to this or to have the access to that. And with that being said, I mean, some of the statistics out there are unbelievable. But like in your experience, you said you've done a lot of parenting, conventions and everything else like that, talking with parents. What do you guys see, and like what is paramount that at least okay, I'm overwhelmed. I know I'm outmanned. I know that I'm out technologied from my kids. What are some ways that instead of just, you suck as a parent, you're dropping the ball to, no, you can do this. You have the bandwidth called the Holy Spirit that's going to equip you, but you also have the ability of those who have gone before you. What do you say to our listeners here right now that are overwhelmed?
Yeah, you mentioned, I think a lot of parents do feel overwhelmed or fearful. And a lot of what we do in the book is try and flip that script upside down. And that's why we titled it Treading Boldly, not Treading Fearfully. And a couple of things to remember as parents. One, and you mentioned it, Dante, the Holy Spirit. I mean, God is with us in this journey. And he doesn't leave his people. He doesn't forsake us or abandon us. He's not going to leave parents hanging out there in the wind with no resources and no hope. But we've got to open ourselves up to the working of God. We've got to open ourselves up hard places. And honestly, I mean, Josh and I know we're dads too. These are hard places to go. And just because we wrote the book doesn't mean we've escaped all of these issues. We haven't. And that's the other thing. This is, we got to get beyond seeing this as only a moral issue. And what I mean by that is definitely a moral issue. You're living in a factory town and there's sulfuric fumes just pumping out day after day, and your kid comes home coughing. I mean, you're not going to be angry at that kid because he's getting sick. But that's what's happening in our culture, is there's so much pornography, not just internet porn, but the messages and the attitudes in pop culture, what they're being taught in schools, what we're seeing on even TV news. I mean, it's pretty highly sexualized everywhere you go, and it's not a healthy sexualization. It's a very distorted sexualization. So let's understand that our kids are breathing in something toxic. And that's the other really hopeful thing, is parents are the best tool their kids are going to have to get through this. I think we don't knock parents. We want to build and uphold and lift up parents, because we know, and really the research shows, parents are the best people to walk their kids through this challenging time and this challenging culture.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, you Sunday school teachers or youth groups, maybe you have them, 1 to 4 hours a week. Teachers, 8 hours, 7 hours, maybe depending on what grade level they are. But it's the parents, around the dinner table, around the weekends, that have the most time. And I think, it's whether we want to kid ourselves or not. In my experience, especially men's ministry and walking with marriages and all that, is guys, first and foremost, you got to take purity seriously yourself. And so it's cleaning house with where I'm at. And then, nextly, like I love what you guys said earlier on, or we were talking about before the podcast, but casting a vision, and what does that vision look like? And so with you guys and going back and writing the book and into the context as our listeners are looking at this, what does it mean for you guys to cast a vision? I know you've alluded to it a little bit here, but give us some of that vision casting of coming out the other side. We're moving our kids from, adolescence to teenagers to adulthood, and we're releasing them into this world. What does that vision look like for them?
I think one of the things we talk about in the book is I think there's a lot of misnomers around the idea of purity. Oftentimes when we're talking about purity, we're talking about the absence of something. But you don't just remove junk and find something pure. You actually have to begin with something good. And so we actually challenge the idea of, instead of thinking about purity, we kind of pull out this antiquated word of chastity. And chastity has much more of a kind of developmental process to it. So one way of thinking about it is, and when we think about vision, we're thinking about, I like to ask the question like, okay, you want to be pure, but pure what? Pure what? And I think we're talking to men here, we're talking to dads. one of our goals as dads, one of our goals as men, is to become good, godly, loving men who love with a Christ-like love. And so when we're looking for a vision for our kids, we want to cast a vision for them to be people who learn to love well. And there are competing messages in the world about what love is. Pornography certainly has its ideas about what love is. But the reason I love this is because think about some of us who did not, quote unquote, stay pure until marriage. I mean, I got into this area of ministry because my own struggle with pornography and other sexual sins. That's how I came to the ministry that I now lead. I was in over my head and I could not break free, even though I thought I should be able to. Anyway, a whole other story. But a lot of us, if we have a fall, if we have sex, if we're indulging in porn, if we're addicted to porn, we feel like we're ruled out. I did it. So as opposed to a bigger vision, I mean, the vision we have to cast for our kids has to be able to sustain falls along the way, bumps along the way, and moving towards chastity, moving towards becoming a whole man or whole woman, and casting that vision for our kids means, okay, you had a fall, or okay, you're struggling. What is the path of becoming Christ-like from here? How does a person who has a fall move towards Christ-likeness? You're doing well. You're doing great. You haven't looked at porn for 3 years. That's great. What does a person who's growing in Christ-likeness go from here? And that's a vision we're always going to be chasing. That's a vision we can always be. And it's a vision that we can be on with our kids, because we're all trying to grow in Christ-like love. So that's just one example of kind of the vision we're trying to cast in this book, to really elevate the conversation above just what not to do, what to abstain from. But really, what are we moving towards? What are we moving for?
Josh, I think you bring up a really good point when you talk about those things, and you talked about your own struggles a little bit. And I think that's really important to cover, in terms of the book itself, but also practically, right? When dads are trying to figure out how to do this. So my kids right now are 10, 5, 2, and I've got one on the way. And so I have just started talking to my 10-year-old. I mean, we found a book, another book that just kind of explains what pornography is, just in very basic terms, and it allowed us to have that conversation, right? But I think one thing you brought up when we were talking beforehand was, how do you bring your own history or your own sexual experience, your own sexual story into that in order to help, I guess, vaccinate your kids against the virus that is pornography?
Well, that's a big part of our book, actually, is this is not just a journey your kids are on. It's something that we want to go on that journey with them. And so the idea of what you're sharing, Dave, is how do I need to become comfortable with my own story. And for a lot of parents, men and women alike, they didn't live sexually pure lives. They had premarital sex. They looked at porn. They may have had same-sex attraction, whatever it is. And they many times haven't found healing there yet. Sometimes they haven't even been able to admit that to anyone else. And so what happens is they're bound up in that sin, that unredeemed sin. And so we know that if you're going to talk to your kids about sex and pornography, whatever their ages are, it's going to stir up your past in you. And so part of it is walking through and into your own story so that you can become that whole person that your son or daughter needs. And so we do have a whole chapter on kind of coming to terms with the fact that we didn't all live it out perfectly, some ongoing healing in that regard, and not to put aside having the sex talk or the porn talk, for several years while you're getting healing, but to take care of yourself as well. Kind of like the airlines tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on your child, because if you're not healthy, if you're not engaged, you may not be able to help your child. And I think that's where a lot of the fear and shame and kind of that feeling of being stuck and bound up in this topic comes from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it takes me back to kind of one main part of my job, which is being an instructor, right? We learn how to do very basic skills and do things, right? But we're not considered really good at it until we're able to teach other people how to do those things. And that's when you really start to flourish, but you're still growing. Like, you're still learning, hey, I can improve this process. I can continue to do things better and better because I'm teaching people different ways and I'm refining the process. And so I think about that and say, look, if I'm still working on my own process, whatever that might be, but I'm using that in order to teach my kids, it's only going to make things better. Like you're only making the prettier thing more pretty, right? Like, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. So I really like what you stated, Dan.
Yeah, to get real practical, Dave, I think, as a first step if there's a dad listening and pornography is an issue for him, really first step is you got to find a band of brothers to be walking with, some people that you're opening up with, other adults who can help shoulder that burden for you so that you can be more equipped to help shoulder whatever burden your son or daughter may be carrying. And even for just a word of hope, even for the parent who's still struggling, because we're all growing towards becoming Christ-like in our loves. But we live in an age right now where if we're not leading and parenting our kids in the area of sexuality, then pornography is. I mean, you think about the internet is incredible competition for parents in the sense of, and let's take a kid who's never seen pornography. They have a question, like somebody's using a word at school and they're like, I don't know what that word is. It sounds like it might be something sexual, I'm not sure. Well, are they going to come to mom and dad, or are they going to type it into the internet, and find out what it says? And the internet is more than willing to play that role. And the internet will never shame. The internet will never ask you how old you are. The internet will never say, where'd you hear that word? And the internet will tell you what it thinks, and it'll show you often what, images and videos that your kids never want to see. So part of what I mean by all this is, again, not to be discouraging, but to say to parents, like, however bad a job you think you may do, however unprepared you may think you are, we guarantee you are a better sex educator than pornography. So, stumble through it, mumble through it, fuddle through it, but get in there. Not just for one conversation. You don't have to get it perfect in one time. This is a part of your relationship with your son or daughter, and you'll grow in it just as they grow in it. So,
yeah. And Josh, I like what you said earlier, as far as your background. I mean, I certainly didn't wait, and I didn't hide that from my kids. As a matter of fact, I was really struggling with that with my wife. Like, what conversations do I have? But then I one of our pastors, one Wednesday night service, just kind of really put it out there and, said, Dad, if you're leaving the sex talk or the sexuality up to your wife or to somebody else in your life because you haven't done it, shame on you. And he goes, that's giving it up, and that's not gospel minded, and that's not biblical truth. And he just really put it out there. And I had a couple, subsequent conversations with him afterwards, and he was right. And the reality of it was, like, my son, I remember one time, he's 17 now, he was, and he just kind of threw it at me. We're just challenging about some purity conversations and some choice and friends and inappropriate, some stuff. Not getting into the details, but text and, just the company that you're choosing and how does that line up with where you're walking. And I remember his jab was, well, Dad, you didn't wait. And I looked at it, instead of shying away or like, oh, that really hurt. The conversation was, you're absolutely right. But the choices that your dad made is a consequence. It's something I have to live with the rest of my life. And, and putting that in context with you, it could be a place, or it could be a perfume, or it could be an event that just triggers that. And I said, so 2 things I did wrong is, number one, I stole that from your mom, and I didn't give that to her. And I said, so that was my bad. Number 2 is that, when you compromise yourself early on and you don't do it God's way, I said, you're robbing yourself and you're putting your mind in prison that you've got to get out of. And that's the reality is, like, guys, if you're listening to this and there's shame and you're stuck in that, if somebody finds out, I'm a youth pastor, or I'm a music director, or I'm this person in this church, or nobody would ever understand. The last I checked, everybody in the church is a sinner. And the last that I checked is everybody falls short. There's only one perfect person that we know, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. So the reality is, get over yourself. And secondly, once you realize that none of us are perfect, we don't live in fear, shame, and guilt, because that's the unholy trinity. And we live through the gospel of Jesus Christ, who gives us the ministry of reconciliation. I love what you said as far as getting our tribe, getting these guys that we know there's relationship, and in relationship, there's discipleship, and really not being afraid to hold it back. And in that testimony, giving them permission to speak into that. And knowing that, I'm listening to this, or others are listening to us, and we have to admit, the healing process, the problem, the solution starts with dad, starts with mom taking things seriously, taking purity seriously. Where do you guys take us next? Okay, so I know I need other brothers. What's the next step? Where do we go from here?
Well, there's multiple roads through this, and I think a lot of that does depend on what your story was and how comfortable you become with it. And by comfortable, I don't mean that it didn't mean anything, but precisely that it meant so much. But that you're walking that journey with Jesus at this point. A lot of us were walking that alone in shame, and now many people, as Josh was saying, as you were saying, Dante, we've learned to walk that with brothers. We've learned to be honest, and that's actually one of the things I think a lot of parents don't understand is that this generation of kids, authenticity is one of their highest values. So if you're honest that, yeah, you may have fallen short, you didn't do it the way you wish you had, you didn't follow God's plan. I think it actually, for this generation, it kind of gives them it endures a respect for you because you're not trying to pretend you're the perfect parent, you're the perfect dad. And so, that's, again, that story based, but I think a lot of parents, to go back to your question, Dante, we have a chapter in there. We talked about getting rid of old maps, like treating this as a journey. And so I think a lot of parents have some notions that we called them the paths of striving. And then we contrast them with paths of grace. And so Josh had already talked about one. It's like, if we treat purity as like an on-off switch, the moment you fall, we've heard stories of kids. Well, I've slept with somebody. Now it doesn't matter who I sleep with or how many times I sleep around, and because we've emphasized purity versus cultivating that habit of the heart, the disposition, that moving towards holiness, moving towards health, moving towards Christ likeness. That's a discipleship path. And so there's some other paths of striving. Like we want to push. Path of striving is pushing perfection or pushing rules versus cultivating relationships. So yeah, we have to have boundaries in our families. We all agree on that. But are the boundaries more important than the relationships? And so there are some of these hurdles that we write about in the book. There may be subtle, but they can be very important kind of mindset changes for parents that actually free them up to engage, what is honestly a difficult topic, but to engage it with greater freedom and flexibility.
You talk about the habit of the heart, Dante. That reminds me, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about, some of the 10 commandments and how, in the Old Testament, it was don't do these things. And then in the New Testament, when Jesus came along, he was like, everything turned into a heart issue, right? And so all of this it's all a heart issue. And where is your heart leading you? And so if you have these tools and these skills to be able to lead your heart in a better direction, I think the fruit is going to be way better. One question I had though, you mentioned obstacles, Dan, and Dan or Josh, you guys can either answer this. I think perhaps one of the obstacles is a dad or a father or somebody saying, my kid's never seen it. This is aimed at people who are maybe a little bit older, like maybe college age kids, but I don't know. I think there are some pretty solid arguments against that. So can you guys kind of talk about how the pornography business in particular is maybe targeting younger and younger generations?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. We actually, in developing some of our material, one of my colleagues was just sharing some statistics about early exposure to pornography. And some people suggest that pornography, the average onset is 8 years old. Where that comes from, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. But she was just mentioning that to another friend and the friend said, there's no way. No, that can't be. But out of curiosity, that friend went to her kid later in the day and pulled up his tablet and was looking through it. And lo and behold, I think he's an 8 or 9 year old. She was like, there was pornography on it. And it just sent her reeling. I think oftentimes like that mindset of like, this is not an issue for my kids is more rooted in a parent's fear of that might be a possibility than it is in the world we're living in. If it's not an issue for your kids, praise God. But 8 years old in this culture is not, by any stretch of the imagination, too early to begin talking to your kids about, well, what is God's design for sexuality? We don't start having these conversations around pornography. We don't start by pointing out what's bad. We want to start with what's good. What's God's good design for your body, for male and female, for marriage, for desire. We want to have those conversations. And you can have those conversations with your kids when they're, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. I mean, we start talking about the way that God has designed our bodies. And in this culture, like, one of the great places to begin is by talking about the differences between boys and girls. I mean, we've had conversations around my dinner table when my kids were little, just where we'd say, hey, what's something great about being a boy? And then we just, everybody goes around and they answer, what's great about being a girl? And, some of the answers are hilarious and funny. But we'll talk about, like, when you touch daddy's face, like, it's scruffy, it hurts. Like, yeah. So mommy's face is nice because it's softer. Yeah, that's a great thing, mom. Yeah. Because, and the reason for that's laying a foundation, because we are, according to Genesis 1, we are created in God's image. And so and Paul extrapolates on this in Romans 1, where he talks about, we are actually the visible expression. God has made his invisible attributes visible through that which he has made. And so we know that there's something about mom's softness that teaches us something about God's glory. There's something about dad's scruffiness or dad's strength that teaches us about God. And so when we talk about that larger vision that we're casting for our kids, when they're very, very young, we are beginning to cast a vision for them to want to grow into those good, beautiful, strong, wonderful, loving aspects that they can see in mom and dad. So again, whether pornography is an issue or not, we want to start talking about sex, and we want to start talking, and that includes gender. So, Daniel, what else would you say about the sex? Because I think I missed part of that question, though.
No, going back to Dave in that question, we actually include some research, or we've got some research in a more recent 2019 study from England, researched like 2,000 parents or families. And 3/4 of the parents interviewed felt that their kids had not seen online pornography. So 3/4 said, no, not my kid. Those families had seen it. And we've seen similar research in the US where parents vastly underestimate how many, whether their kids have seen pornography at pretty much any age they've measured. And so what this tells us, going back to what I shared earlier, the question is not, it shouldn't be, would my kid be the kind of kid to look at pornography? The question is pornography, is the internet, are pornographers going to respect our family's values? And the answer is unequivocally no. They don't respect our values or our boundaries. And as you said, Dave, you asked, they're intentionally putting porn links on gaming sites, which are very popular for young boys down to 6 and 7. So if you click on something that looks innocent, you're going to be taken immediately to a porn site. And the problem is, research tells us an image will register on the mind in 0.3 of a second. That's faster than it takes to click out of something. So the damage is definitely done, and damage in varying degrees. Pornography is, I don't mean to oversell it, but it's after our kids. And, when we were younger, we had to go looking for it, or you'd find it in a dumpster or something, needing to pass a Playboy around. But that's just not the case. And so that's really what we're saying. Like, don't see this as only a moral issue. It certainly is, but understand that the culture is taking no prisoners. And so parents, we want them to be bold. We took that language of boldness from Jesus. He sent out the 72, go and cast out demons, preach the gospel, heal the sick. And they went out with boldness. The boldness wasn't because they were so awesome. The boldness was because they were going out with the power and the authority of Jesus. And so we believe parents have the calling to bring God's power and his authority in this realm. And the disciples came back and said they were stomping on serpents and scorpions. Those are spiritual enemies. And this is a spiritual enemy that God gives us the authority and the power to go boldly into it with our kids. And so, Don't think it's not an issue for your family. It is, but that doesn't have to always be a bad thing. And just opening up the conversation. Hey, I heard this podcast and it talked about parents talking to their kids about pornography. We never talked about that. Can I ask you a few questions? Have you seen this? Do you know what that word means? What do your friends say? Do you hear them talking or use that word? And then you might find out your child has seen it. And that might be a really beautiful moment of bringing that relationship into greater light. And they might be very relieved. In fact, a lot of kids are really relieved to have their parents on board and walking with them on this journey.
So there's so much what you said right there, Daniel and Josh. Like my head is just swirling with a couple things, and I don't want to miss it. But earlier on, we talked about the trafficking, and we're looking at like $100 billion industry here. And so if you don't think that this impacts in the Midwest, the tri-state area where I live, I can tell you that I've seen 10 churches here that are dealing with victims of trafficking. And so don't be naive to sit there and say, well, I'm not doing any harm in this because it's just me and my solace or what I want to do in my house. The reality of it, it's so much more serious than that. And then just putting on a biblical lens, taking this idea of, it doesn't say perfect righteousness, through our life, it's this process of sanctification, but scripture in New Testament clearly says for us is to practice righteousness, and righteousness in that term is being right with God. And so how can you sit there and take something that is not God's will, and that's pornographic, and sitting there and saying, well, this is my justification? With a holy God, there's no justification. So, you're not going to hear me advocating for YouTube, but they had this great documentary special out. It was Social Dilemma. And, if you're not a YouTube subscription or you don't have that, find out a way, get it from a friend or whatever, that you can watch this, because we talk about algorithms and a lot of these creators, a lot of these social designers, for Facebook and for major media outlets, will not let their kids have access to the internet. They absolutely refuse to let their kids have access. And it's kind of like you have to sit there and say, as a listener, this is crazy that the developers of this and the outcome of how dangerous these algorithms are for your kids, for your moms, for your dads, for your church, for your community, it is very serious. And you go into the gaming thing, and I don't want to miss this point, but the gaming thing, one of the most dangerous places for your kids is exactly that, because a lot of these gaming, front end systems allow you to have chat. And that's, believe it or not, where a lot of predators, are grooming your kids, through shock and awe. I think, Daniel, you said that as far as images that flash. And so before you even realize it, your kids likely talking to a pedophile, likely talking to a sexual predator, thinking that it's somebody else their age, somebody else in their understanding, and it has nothing to do with that. And so it's more the seriousness of educating yourself, of realizing what you're dealing with here. But the other thing too, and maybe I want to go this long way about getting to this point of my question, but thanks for letting me elaborate a little bit on that, is pornography steals intimacy. It doesn't build it. It doesn't bring you and your loved one, your covenant marriage that God gave us between one man and one woman. It doesn't build intimacy. It destroys it. It's a stealer. It steals joy. It steals intimacy. We have to take back the fact that God gave us sex. God gave us intimacy between man and woman. I mean, this is the God that I gave, that gave us his son, that gave us his word. I mean, he gave us the book of Song of Psalms, Song of Solomon. And I mean, when you read that in the context of like, this is just an awesome and incredible God. And you start having these realistic conversations as the young mind can start to have it about what's good between man and woman when they become married. You can take back this territory that the enemy thinks he's got a stronghold on. And you can say, no. God of holiness, God of purity, he intended all of these things for you with the bride, with the groom, to come to be one flesh. And when you become that one flesh, how awesome and just mighty that is. And so like getting into this, like taking it back, like what are some of the things that you say, what else do you want to tell our parents, tell these individuals that are listening to this podcast? Why do we have to tread boldly and not like shy away from territory that the enemy has already seeped into?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the positivity and this is what we're for. And so one of the things we advocate, Daniel mentioned this before, is just we're not having a talk, we're having conversations. And so we mean two things by that. One is this isn't once and done. This is an ongoing process. It's a part of our parenting. Like we talk to our kids about manners. I don't know, 6-7 days a week in my house. Like, we talk to them about sports. We talk to them about all sorts of things. Did you brush your teeth? Did you brush your teeth? Brush your teeth? Like sexuality has to be a part of our conversations from when they're very young, as long as they'll talk to us. The other thing we mean about conversation is it has to be two-way. So it's us sharing. It's also us asking good questions. And especially as our kids get older, we want their buy-in. That's a huge thing we underline in the book a lot. If we only have our kids in our house for so much time. My oldest will be off to college soon. There's just what we want to do is we want to bring what we have and download as much as we can. But we really want our kids engaged in thinking. And one of the great things about teenagers is their brain is actually developing in such a way where they want to process, they want to argue, they want to debate. So we're like, let's bring that. So just a real practical example with the movies you watch, the shows you watch, the music you listen to, like line it up. Like what does real love look like? And what does lust look like? And so like I like a simple definition, like lust is using somebody else's body for my sexual pleasure. It's a selfish thing. Love, in contrast, is me giving myself for another's good. And I think here of Jesus' words, the Last Supper, this is my body given for you. And so that's a beautiful expression of love. And that's really what the marriage bed is supposed to be. This is my body, not held back, not in part, but fully given to you. And so we want to begin comparing what are the messages of the shows, the music, the movies we're watching, and is it a message of love or is it a message of lust? Because we want our kids to begin interpreting what they're seeing. As they get into the teenage years, like you'll have lots of great conversations. I mean, we've had conversations in my house where I'm literally looking at something going like, well, this was crap, like let's expose this. And my kids are pointing out like, well, I saw love here. I saw love here. I loved this. And I've been blown away. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I better watch what I say. And the other thing about this, this is woven into what it means to be a human being. And so even in not in every place, sure, but even in some of the shows that I've thought like, it's just not there. Media knows what sells, and we really are all hungry for an authentic, self-giving love. And so there are expressions that continue to come through, even in our sex-crazed, depraved world. So did I answer your question?
No, very, very good.
So much to cover there, but
yeah, there's a lot to chew on, but I mean, the whole point of it is having this real conversation, not being afraid to take back territory that the enemy thinks that he has on it. And I love that you guys are bringing a practical way by which to challenge our listeners, to challenge your readers to, this isn't a beat you down, drag you down, and just tell you you're inept or you're not qualified or you're not going to have the bandwidth to do so. But really, there are practical ways by which to do this. And so I really like that. Dave, what say you?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I want to take it one more step, I think, before we close it up. Practically speaking, we talked about the devil, the enemy having maybe a little bit of a foothold. What if the devil opens the door a little bit and you have discovered as a father, as a parent, that your child has been accessing this stuff, has seen this stuff, whether it was one time or whether it was habitually? What do you do?
Yeah, we dedicate 3 chapters of the book to really talk about when you discover a son or daughter's been exposed to pornography and the kinds of questions you can ask, the way to approach it, the way to really invite them into conversation, because pornography is a shameful experience in and of itself. And there's a cyclical nature to what happens with and how shame feeds into returning to pornography. So there's not time to go into all that here, but it is one of those places that's one of the hardest places to go. I go back to something I said earlier. you need to have your tribe. You need to have some safe people for you to talk to. So just first step, I'd say, I'll give you first, maybe 2-3 steps. One is you go to your people, your adult people, the trustworthy people who are not going to betray your kids' confidence. And you just say, you freak out with them, because you don't want to freak out in front of your son or daughter, because you don't want to scare them off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're grounded for life. You're grounded for life. Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you, what is, don't. Yeah. And then step number 2, when you're ready. And so you don't rush in, but you also don't wait forever. When you're ready, you go and you tell them what you found. Too many parents, they beat around the bush. They ask questions they already know the answers to, which is just setting your kid up to run and hide. Don't give your kid an opportunity to lie to you. Like it's a natural, it's sinful, but it's a natural response when you're feeling ashamed and scared is to run and hide. Adam and Eve did it. Your kids are going to want to do it. So Johnny, you left your phone on the counter the other day. I picked it up and looked at it, and there's a lot of porn on there. Just tell them what you saw. Gently look him in the eye, and then an open-ended question. And we actually give a lot of examples of open-ended questions in one of the chapters. But so one example would be like, can you tell me what's been going on? And then listen. And know that whatever your son or daughter does or doesn't say in that moment, whether they know it or not, they are looking and listening and paying real close attention to what you're doing. And so even if they don't open up, even if they deny it right away, they're paying attention to find out, am I safe to talk about this with mom or dad? So we want to, one of my favorite verses, Romans 2:4, it is the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. And so we want as much as we can approach this in a kind way. You don't do this, you don't come, it's not a battle. You're really trying to come alongside your son or daughter. The enemy is the porn, and we want to come alongside them to get on their team and hopefully walking away from this.
I just want to add, Josh is given like the really ideal situation. As someone who has not always walked that path with my own family, I can affirm what he's saying is really good, because I did have a situation earlier this year. We'd just gotten my daughter a phone, and she friended someone on Facebook she thought was from her old school. And within about, honestly, 10 minutes, the guy was revealing pretty clearly that he was a predator. And she showed this to me, and it was late at night. We were about to go to bed, and I'm like, what? And I did everything Josh said not to do. And I spent several days walking that back. I felt horrible because she wanted to hide. She didn't fully trust me. What was I going to do with this? And I had to be really clear with her over several conversations. I'm not upset at you. My reaction would be because I'm so angry that someone would do this to you. So, we're all going to make those mistakes. I think just being prepared and equipped can help lessen them, but also give us the next step. So parents, don't be too hard on yourself. The guy that wrote the book with Josh made the same mistake. Well,
and I'm giving you the ideal, but
yeah, the rest of us lived perfectly. I mean, we never make mistakes, Daniel. So no. You can talk to all of my kids; they'll tell you a different story.
Yeah. So we want to have compassion on parents. It's really hard, and we're being asked to do something that no parent should have to do, and we just have to reckon with the fact that we live in a sinful, fallen world, and it's affecting us. And that's why we appeal to the grace of God. We ask for the grace of God to go forward. We ask for the grace of God to cover our mistakes, to heal those breaches in the relationship, and to build that trust. And, we work at it, and God is with us. And that's why we're hopeful, because God is always there.
I appreciate that. So Daniel, Josh, I'll let Dave close, but before I do, I'm going to ask you guys each one question. So the question is for both of you. If you had one listener that you had in mind when you wrote or co-wrote this book that you want to reach tonight, that's listening to this podcast this morning when we release it, what do you want them to hear from you? Like, what your takeaway, what hit you the most in either writing this, reading this, proofing it, reproofing it? What is the one thing that spoke to you and that you're hoping that the Holy Spirit will meet them right where they're at?
Man, this might sound like it's completely a different book, but it's not. I mean, we really did write this book for parents, not to scold, not even so much to teach. Like, we really believe in parents and believe that God, I mean, we are all parents, but God is still our Father. So the one thing I want to say is, Jesus loves you immensely, and He's with you in this journey. You don't need to be afraid. All the things you want to be able to bring to your kid that you're struggling to bring, Jesus brings to you because you're His kid. You're his little boy, his little girl. He's got you. He's with you.
Right on. Right on. Thanks, Josh, for that. Daniel, what about you?
Yeah, we, from the very beginning, when we decided to write this book and we started sketching out the content, Josh and I, we met weekly for several years working on this book. And we met by phone and talked about the writing and different concepts. But every week we prayed for the reader. Every week we prayed for the parent that might pick this up. And really is take courage because God is with you. We recognize this is a hard topic. This is a shameful topic. This touches parents where they may not feel healing yet. But God wants to be in that space because He wants to redeem what's been broken in us and in our kids. So take courage and let God be with you.
Well, listeners, that we'll wrap it up right there. I would like to thank Josh Glaser and Dan Weiss, the authors of the book Treading Boldly Through a Pornographic World, a field guide for parents. We will put this in the show notes, so you'll be able to click on it there. Guys, when does the book come out? Is it out already? I don't think it is. It comes out pretty soon, right?
Yeah, June 15th.
June 15th. Yep. So it'll be ready to go a couple days after this podcast posts. And you can pick it up. It'll be super helpful for you if you're trying to navigate this conversation and trying to figure out just how to go through this process in this digitally saturated world that we are now living in, whether it's a COVID environment and everybody is working from home or otherwise, and everyone's working on their devices. So, gentlemen, I truly appreciate your time on here. I certainly plucked out a bunch of great information, and I'm certain that our listeners are going to have that as well. So we'll put that in the show notes. If y'all enjoyed the podcast today, please go to whatever platform you listen through. Leave us a review. 5 stars is great. And if not, just let us know what we did wrong. Once again, we'll try and fix it next time. And we're always up for course corrections, right or left. We'll try and keep on the right path. And with that, God bless you all, and we'll talk to y'all later.
God bless.